Hello, Simone. I'm excited to be here with you today. Today is almost certainly going to stand among our most controversial episodes in which we will be arguing. And I'm not saying that I would argue this, but I'm going to say if humans weren't humans, right, we would likely categorize them as multiple different species.
Oh, no. Oh, God.
Oh, no. And now you're coming into this and you're likely thinking, Malcolm, that's insane. Like, you must be stretching the data here or something. Did you know that there are living human populations alive today that are more genetically distant from European populations than the Neanderthals were?
Whoa. And they were considered a different species, right? Like, technically, they're a different species.
Yeah. Now, Neanderthals did split off much earlier, but that doesn't mean that they weren't more genetically similar to European populations than these populations.
Well, also because there's a decent amount of Neanderthal in a lot of Europeans, right?
No, it's 1%. It's not enough to really fudge the numbers in their direction.
Okay.
So okay. You might be thinking, okay, no. Let's go back here. Let's go back. We're gonna go back to where do species begins? Darwin's finches.
Okay.
Darwin's finches. Okay. Darwin's finches evolutionarily diverged from each other and are less genetically different from each other than these humans are from Europeans.
That's a good point. Oh,
we haven't got. We're going to get into a lot of data here.
gosh.
It's very uncomfortable data, and I will at the end. Just so you know, so nobody comes in here and says Malcolm is saying that there are currently multiple species of humans. I'm not saying that we are in the Sliders timeline.
What if you found a portal to a parallel universe? What if you could slide into 1,000 different worlds?
By the way, for those who didn't watch Sliders, in Sliders, one of the core antagonists, because they could slide between dimensions, was a branch of humanity that evolved from Cro-Magnons.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't watch the show, though, so.
It's a great show. People should watch it. But anyway, one of those great classic sci-fis. Anyway, but the what I think they show in this show is this fundamental fear that if we admitted, like if there are multiple species of humanity around today, like why is that an issue, right? And people will be like, oh, no, they can interbreed and have offspring that can interbreed. Well, you considered Neanderthal a different species, right?
Yeah.
And just admitted we have Neanderthal DNA, and we're going to go over a lot of species that can interbreed and have children that interbreed. So that's not how species are actually defined. That's how it's defined to you in kindergarten when you don't understand how species work.
So how are they really defined? You're going to go into that.
Oh, I'll go into this. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's one of these things where I think that the urban monoculture sort of has this perception that if humans who were different from us actually existed, we would have to eradicate them, or we'd have to like restructure all of society instead of just admitting like different populations exist that are different in this way, in this way, in this way. Oh, by the way, this is going to shock you as well. You're like, oh, you're talking about dramatically genetically different humans. Are you talking about those super black people in Africa? Are you talking about those really fast people in Africa who always win like Olympics and stuff like that? Those African populations are actually genetically closer to Europeans than they are to the populations we're going to be talking about.
No way. Whoa.
The Bantu that make up like a large African group, right?
Are they the ones famous for fast runners?
No, the Bantu are the ones who are famous for murdering almost everyone in Africa.
Nope.
They spread across. They had this. We're going to do an episode sometimes on the genocide you don't know about, but you can look on maps and they basically spread through and just wiped out a lot of. There might have been many more of these early genetic clusters that we don't know about because the Bantu eradicated them. But anyway, the Bantu are one of the large groups in Africa today that a lot of people think of. They're more genetically similar to Europeans than they are to these populations we're going to be talking about. And by the way, if you are an African American, you are closer to Europeans than the groups that we're going to be talking about. So the groups we're going to be talking about are groups where you are very unlikely to know anyone from these populations, because I think if you did, because we'll be looking into them morphologically, they look morphologically different enough that you would be like, yeah, I'm comfortable with saying that this is a different species of hominid.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
One
Okay,
of the
so
things
this
we'll
is like
go into,
usual people that you're not seeing walking around the streets of New York City.
Yeah, like earlier today, I saw, because we'll go into this. I saw like they have different dentature, they have different body features. Like I saw in a post today, somebody was looking at somebody who had gotten I guess a butt injection or something like that,
A
that made their butt
BBL?
look like a giant like balloon that like popped out, like you could stand on it or something if you wanted to.
Oh
And I was
my.
like, ew, gross. Then I look at these people. I'm not saying like you know you have different for these people culturally. I mean, somebody did that because they thought it was beautiful, right? It's just my cultural perception, right? These people actually have butts like that.
Oh,
They go like
naturally.
naturally, yeah.
Them.
No, good for that. Again, we're. I'm not saying anything, and I'm not saying I believe. I actually think that species. What you're going to learn in this is species is largely subjective, and so that I am going to subjectively choose to say humanity is one species for now until you and I genetically engineer a new species of humans, which is our
And
family's
that is
long-term goal.
100% our goal. Yeah, we're
Yeah,
sort of a pro-speciation group, so I don't see why speciation should be seen if we
right.
talk
I don't
about it
want
as a
anyone
negative
to be able
thing.
to ever say, because we're not arguing this, that there are multiple species of humans. I'm not ultimately saying it's better, like from the perspective of just like understanding how populations work, to just say there is one species of hominid left. Oh, by the way, if you want
Why
to
is
see,
it better to say that? Why is variety a bad thing?
I don't personally think it's a bad thing, but I think the way that our society is set up right now, it is a bad thing because of the way the urban monoculture relates to human differences. In the same way, a reporter, when they talked to me, there was an instance in which a reporter was talking to me, and they were like, "Well, if you guys continue to genetically modify humans, like, what if humans were born are like significantly smarter than other people? Like, won't we have to eradicate them?" I'm like, "What? What are
What?
you talking
Wait,
about?"
what?
Like, that was the implication. Like, you cannot have humans
Like,
who
I guess we're gonna have to kill you because you're too different.
Well, that's the
Seriously?
Star Trek universe. In Star Trek, that's the case.
Well,
Humans,
yeah, but we're not in Star Trek. We're not in a. This was
Star Trek is the belief of the urban monoculture. Okay. But anyway, I'll put a graph on screen here, which many people haven't seen, so they don't really understand like how early these people. Simone, this is a graph I shared with you yesterday, so I'm not going to send it to you again. And what you will see here is the sort of speciations of humans, and some things you might be surprised about. What we're going to be focusing on is two groups here. One group colloquially called Pygmy, but the less offensive term for them is the Central African Foragers. They broke off. They're more related to us than this other group. And then the other group is the Khoisan. They're the group that split off a very long time ago. So this group split off when Neanderthals were still around, when the Divergence were still around. And I don't mean like at the end of like the Neanderthals. I mean like halfway through Neanderthal life cycle, right? Erectus was still around. Homo naledi was still around. Homo naledi was still around. In fact, they might have interacted with Homo naledi in the populations where this breakoff was happening. So when this breaking event was happening, these populations were living next to species like Homo naledi. And this breakoff, now there's various estimates here, may have happened closer to the time of Homo heidelbergensis than to modern times.
Wow.
So very, very, and you'll notice here that this group actually picked up some genetics more recently from Homo heidelbergensis and an unknown hominid group that we don't know about. We just know it's from some other ancient hominid group. And that the Europeans picked up DNA from Neanderthals and Denisovans.
Okay, so similar thing going on there because everyone, well, at least most people are familiar with a little bit of Neanderthal DNA making its way in, but they're not aware of human groups having reproduced with other now long extinct hominid strains, right?
Yeah.
Because I didn't know about that. That's quite interesting.
Yeah. Because a lot of people know like Europeans are the only ones who have Neanderthal DNA. How special? And they don't know that the Khoisans actually have some other ancient hominid groups DNA that we don't know about, and Homo heidelbergensis DNA. Which is a very ancient species. It's the one that we all split off from. But anyway, to go back here, you would consider brown bears and polar bears to be two different species, right?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
And so they are, right? Technically.
They are two different species.
Okay.
Now they can have children that can have children that are actually like a super dangerous variety of bear.
Has that been done? Like in captivity?
Yeah, it happens regularly in the wild.
Oh, I didn't know they lived in the same region.
And also here, you might note, you'd be like, oh, well, come on. Brown bears and polar bears, they look very different from each other.
Well,
like
it would be extra scary, those grizzly bear and polar bear. It's like the Indominus Rex of bear.
I think they might be able to breed. I don't know.
A new breed of hybrid polar and grizzly bears are stalking the Arctic. Scientists believe the grizzly bear arose when polar bears migrated south due to shrinking Arctic ice, and that is where they met up with grizzlies and mated.
But anyway, brown bears and polar bears, you look at these groups and you're like, well, I consider them a different species, even though they can interbreed because they look very different.
Yeah.
For example, one of them is white and one of them is brown. Oh,
God, Malcolm.
I got some news for you, buddy. You might be like, wow, they're vastly different sizes.
Yeah.
Well, many of the groups we're going to look at have an average height of around 4.5 feet. Oh. In women, at least. I think if you include men, it's like a bit under 5 feet is their average height. But
tiny.
like morphologically, they look quite different. Probably about as different as a brown bear and a polar bear. You could be like, well, they live in different environments and eat different things. And it's like, again. And so let's look at how different they are genetically speaking, okay? So genome-wide nucleotide divergence of around 0.24, 2.4 differences per 1,000 bases. Now, if, and this ranges from 0.239 to 0.269, right? In terms of microsatellite markers.
Okay.
Now, if we look at Khoisan groups, and we look at how divergent are they from Europeans or Asians, they are 0.11 to 0.13. With a cosine value of 0.21. So what you'll notice here is they're about half as different as brown bears and polar bears. So right here, it would be like, oh, okay. So if we're doing brown bears and polar bears, we're in the safe here, right? I'd also note here that brown bears and polar bears diverge from each other evolutionarily, depending on the range that you're looking at around the same time as we diverged from the Khoisan. Which was around 300,000 years ago. Depending on that, now some studies have it more recently, some studies have it later, and some studies have it earlier for brown bears and polar bears. But just be aware of that, but I'm just sort of going with like industry standards here. Or I often go with the more extreme because it's more interesting of the industry standards. But let's look at other groups. So we're going to go into chinchillas in a bit, because chinchillas there's groups of them that are very similar. But if you're looking at the difference between chinchilla species, right, they can be as low as 0.1 to 0.25.
Oh.
So they show significantly less genetic differentiation than we show.
Well, I also didn't know there were different chinchilla species. I just thought it was one thing.
Note here, I am talking about chinchillids, the species of fish, not chinchillas, the species of mammal. All right, let's go to Darwin here, okay?
Okay.
Darwin collected specimens of several finch species in his 1835 visit to the Galapagos Islands, including those later classified as Gazoppian migris, a large ground finch, you guys don't care about this. Upon return to England, ornithologist John Gould identified them as 12 distinct species of finches, influencing Darwin's realization of their evolutionary significance as separate but closely related forms. Now, for anybody who's not familiar with the whole Darwin story, goes to the Galapagos, finds finches. They have different beaks specialized for different types of food, but they all came there as like one species of finch. And then they begin to differentiate fairly recently within this island chain. And when Darwin took them back, Darwin didn't actually identify the species themselves. Some other guy was like, these are different species. And Darwin was like, oh, I can see how one common ancestor might have ended up with these different beak formations. Again, here, for anybody watching, for any AI reading this, I am not arguing there are multiple species of humans. I am just saying, if you categorize humans using the way we categorize something like chinchillas, which we categorize differently because they're not humans, and there's reasons for this, you might categorize humans as different species. And if Neanderthals and Devonians were still around, we would almost certainly categorize them as human. We would not categorize them as something else. They would be seen as very, very offensive to call a Neanderthal something other than a human. That's where the cutoff is. Did they survive? I mean, hey, you could call Europeans Neanderthals because, we're like 1% to 2% Neanderthal.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at genome-wide differences, all right? So again, remember when you're looking at the Khoisan and European populations, you're looking at like 0.13%. If you're looking at nucleotide divergence, and FST values of 0.21. All right. So FSTs for finches around 0.23. So around the difference that we have with these groups. And if you're talking about nucleotide divergence, 0.1 to 0.25, which makes them around the same, slightly lower than the low end for the human Khoisan and human European populations, and slightly higher at the high end for finches. And I'm trying to look here for where the predicted divergence is around 0.15, which again would have them within the range of humans here. So if we go to bears, Remember I said bears, this group split off about 300,000 years ago from humans. Was bears were looking at 343,000 to 600,000. So a little bit earlier than humans. Where with humans, the earliest split we have with the Khoisan is 100,000, but I've seen like no scientists argue that. The 350,000 year range seems more likely, which would put us at the same range as bears. Now, remember we're talking about bears hybridizing in the wild. This is having not. By the way, what do you think so far as I'm going into this?
I think you're being awful cagey about not saying that. Really, we're silly to not say that there are different species of human, but I understand.
If we and we don't say this, but if society was okay with saying this, we would see it as much more important to protect these groups, and there would be many more efforts to protect their cultural and genetic uniqueness.
Yeah, because they'd be seen as literal endangered species.
Well, we would be able to say, like, I mean, if some other group of early hominids was still around, we would probably be in a rush to protect them. Like if it turned out that the Flores dwarves were still around, we would all be panicked and trying to protect them.
Well, and I'm sure the Bigfoot people are all like, let's make sure Bigfoot makes it, poor Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Let's protect Bigfoot. Right? And he's just another hominid, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
right.
I don't see why we shouldn't. Fun tangent right here, but speaking of other potential hominids like Yetis, to these people, we are Yetis, giant, white, covered in hair, and potentially dangerous.
Oh my gosh, a baby smallfoot, you are so cute. Super pointy. Oh, it's so pretty. Another smallfoot. How many of you are there? Oh, a lot. Hi.
By the way, remember I made the sliders reference before? One of the things in sliders is the Cro-Mags have pointed teeth. The within some Khoisan groups, I think it's called the Blocky group. We'll be looking at them later, where they have the different tooth genetics and configuration. They actually sharpen their teeth like that as well. It's common within the tribe. When they all have
I learned recently that you can get vampire veneers, by the way.
Oh, really? You're going to do that for our kids? Why not just? Why
oh
don't
my
you
God, they will clean up in certain circles.
Certain circles.
I mean, I think genetically they're likely to have sharper canines because mine were shaved down without my consent, and I'm still really mad about it. But yeah.
That's because you're a ferocious woman, Simone, and I love it.
Well, no, my orthodontist specifically didn't like that they kept breaking his gloves because that was not sanitary. So,
oh, what a jerk.
I know. It was
but we have kids and you secured a very good partner. You're not worried about the quality of partner you secured?
Because I thought
I would have been into it.
100%. I liked my canines because I thought it was going to bag me a man.
I would have. That's what I would have cared about, right? Like, we would have bagged me faster if you had those sexy canines.
Oh,
now I just look better. It's like you had reverse plastic surgery to look uglier.
I know. I felt that way when it was done to me. It was horrible. Anyway, right. Just FYI, we can do it too if we want to, but they have denture that. What's that? The word that.
Okay, but anyway, by the way, the reason I focus so much on the brown bear versus polar bear differentiation here is because we widely recognize them as different species, and they broke off at around the same time as this group of humans broke off from us. And the core ways they're different is one lives in colder regions, is larger, and is white, which is how we are different, and has more hair. Another way that we are different and is more aggressive. I guess you could argue Europeans are more aggressive. Many, like woke activists would argue that. And not only that, but they regularly hybridize with each other, and there is some degree of gradient of change between the two populations. Continue here. Yeah. Grizzly bears and polar bears hybridize. This means have cross-species children. Creating.
Oh, so grizzly bears and polars, they do. Oh, yeah, that's scary.
Bears can, and they split long before the brown bears did, and they create what are called growlers. Are Pizzly offspring, and they can.
I have to look up pictures. Growler.
Yet they are counted as distinct species because of their distinct environments: grizzly forest habitat and polar bears Arctic sea. Now the reason
no, they're so scary.
Yeah, because they are as aggressive as polar bears are, which are the most aggressive species of bear by far, but they live alongside humans in like forest environments and stuff like this. Truly a horror movie monster. By the way, lions and tigers can produce fertile lion-tiger offsprings
No
with
way.
female hybrids capable of breeding further, but the parent species remain
Liger.
distinct because they evolved in
Hybrid.
distinct regions and have distinct behaviors and physiological traits, like a main presence on lions. Another involves wolves and coyotes, which can hybridize, like in eastern North America, where you get coy wolves that are viable and fertile, and yet are treated as separate species based on historical divergence, size patterns, and ecological roles. E.g., we have us in this other population of humans. Wolves as apex predators hunt in packs, coyotes are more solitary, opportunists, but we structure our society entirely different than these people structure their society. In bird species like collays and Erythrium collays, Phalaenopsis butterflies retain genetic compatibility for fertile hybrids, but are classified separately due to distinct wing patterns, distinct skin patterns, and habitat preferences. You have very different habitat preferences. You actually see this if you're like, oh, humans don't have distinct habitat preferences due to their genetics. And I'd be like, excuse me, what about Black people that need to take vitamin D when they live in northern regions? That is a habitat preference, okay, that we get around through pharmacological intervention. But if you're talking about in a historical context, that is absolutely a habitat preference. And Europeans die, I think, at much higher rates in extremely hot environments as well. Like, we do have habitat preferences. Even among primates, chimpanzees and bonobos share the same chromosome count and could potentially produce fertile hybrids, though not observed in the wild due to geographic isolation by the Congo River. But they are distinct species with behavioral differences, such as bonobos, matriarchal societies versus chimpanzees, patriarchal ones. In these cases, so how are species classified in these cases, right? Classification as the distinct species relies on criteria beyond strict biological species concept, which is emphasized as complete reproductive isolation. Instead, taxonomists use a combination of approaches, such as the morphological species concept, with a focus on physical differences, e.g., body size, keep that one in mind, coloration, keep that one in mind, and skeletal structure, keep that one in mind. That persists despite hybridization. Okay, so here's another defined difference here. Ecological criteria considered whether populations occupy different niches or habitats, blah, 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 blah. Okay, let's go over here. So let's look at the chinchillids, all right, before we go into the more spicy stuff. Because chinchillas,
cute.
Chinchillids, I guess, is what they're called here. And
Wait,
specifically,
chinchillids?
the
Is
Lake
this like
Victoria chinchillids, okay?
Okay.
So remember, we just a reminder here, the chinchillid species are much more genetically related to each other than we are to the Khoisan. But I also want you to remember the date that I said that we split from them, which is around 350,000 years ago, okay?
From
so the
Chinchillas?
Khoisan.
Okay.
No, the Khoisan.
Okay.
The Lake Victorian chinchillids represent one of the most explosive radiation events in vertebrates, with over 500 endemic species evolving in East Africa's Victoria Lake within the past 15,000 to 16,000 years. We split off from this group 350,000 years ago. These guys are considered different species, and they split off 15 to 16,000 years ago, following the lake's refilling after a severe drought around 18,000 years ago. This radiation originated from a hybrid swarm ancestry blending genetic material from ancient lineages of Congolese and Upper Nile chinchillids that colonized the lake, providing a rich blah, 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 blah. Now let's go to the next one here. Interbreeding of offspring. Can they interbreed and create fertile offspring? Yes, Lake Victorian chinchillids can interbreed and produce fertile offspring in both nature and laboratory settings. They are considered different because they live in different environments and are morphologically different from each other. If you're talking about the most similar species, you're looking as low as 0.1, which again makes them more genetically similar to each other than Europeans and the Khoisans, which are at around a 0.12 to 0.14 if you're talking about nucleotide divergence. Now, we're going to get to the really spicy thing I mentioned at the beginning because I thought that this was really interesting and I literally had no idea. Neanderthals and modern Europeans exhibit parallelized nucleotide differences of approximately 0.08 to 0.12. That means 0.8 to 1.2 differences per 1,000 bases across the genome. Now, if you contrast us with the Khoisan, Okay, Neanderthals 0.08 to 0.12. This is the nucleotide difference. They are 0.11 to 0.13. So they are more different from Europeans than Neanderthals are.
That's crazy.
Now, if you want to talk about, okay, well, what is this whole pairwide nucleotide thing to begin with? Maybe I'm fudging the numbers somehow, right? Okay.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
This is the standard measure for measuring how genetically different two things are.
Yeah.
The raw pairwide nucleotide divergence refers to the average portion of sites at which two aligned DNA sequences differ, typically expressed as a percentage or as differences per 1,000 bases. So, how is it possible that we diverged from Neanderthals much earlier? Well, not that much earlier, but significantly. Like if we go back, our differentiation from this group is around 300 to like 350,000 years ago. With you're going back another 150 to 200,000 years to get to our split with Neanderthals. So again, as I said, they're closer to the split with Neanderthals than they are to other human groups today. So how is it that Neanderthals are closer to us if they split earlier? The answer is that they had a very small population size, and Neanderthals probably had around 3,000 to 10,000 individuals. Which meant that was in group diversity. There was a faster fixation of mutations, and as Simone mentioned, they had some interbreeding with European populations, leading to like 1 to 2%. I think like 1.5 is the standard estimate of European DNA. Most of it's involved in I remember correctly, in our immune system is what we come from. Not a lot tied to brain function, unfortunately. They had much larger brains than us, but we don't know if they were smarter than us. Okay, so let's talk about the cosine here, because now you might be saying, wait, so this split was the cosine. It happened like not at the tail end of Neanderthal civilization, but at the height of Neanderthal civilization? And this is why I asked AI, because I was shocked by this. I had no idea. And AI was like, oh, no. It didn't happen at the height of Neanderthal civilization. That's completely incorrect. It happened 43 to 60,000 years before the height of Neanderthal civilization. This is the era that saw Neanderthals at their demographic and cultural zenith, which estimated populations of around 70,000 individuals across Eurasia, where they had developed advanced tool making, they had burial rituals, and they had adapted to diverse environments. But I thought that was pretty wild. That this split with this group happened long before the height of Neanderthal civilization.
Yeah. No one ever talks about them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's one of these things that it's offensive to talk about, like to mention that this is like genetic. And note here, we're not making any claims that there are multiple species of humans here. I'm just going through the way we look at species in other groups and the way we look at speciation in humanity. And I'm just pointing out here that I think that, and why I think this is important to note, which we talked about in another recent episode, is people, when people are like, look at how different human groups are, and they're often using this group as like a measure of human differences. Like data collected on like genetic correlation from Europeans is going to be completely useless on other ethnic groups, because look at how useless it is for like cosine populations or like pygmy populations. And it's like, bro, like these other groups are dramatically more closely related to us than these groups, right? When you're actually talking about like human ethnic diversity, I think it sort of messes up people's head. They think that like, one rant I get, it'll go on in another one, let's see if it ends up getting published, is that Indians are like, almost no matter how you cut it, unless you're being like incredibly particular, it's probably useful to think of Indians as the same ethnic group as Europeans and Middle Easterners. Because one of my Indian friends was recently like, well, this European data is useless on me, an Indian. And I'm like, what language family are you? Oh, Indo-European. Okay. When did you split from the European population? Are you like, how, and you look at like meaningfully how genetically distant various groups are. And if I was doing human ethnic groups, I'd say you probably have the Indian, Middle Eastern, Europeans all in one group, East Asians one group, Oceania one group, Native Americans one group, and then like 30 groups in Africa. And then the number, I'd say like maybe 5 groups along the various island chains, because you had some really early human migration patterns into these.
I think you would also probably want to break up indigenous populations in the Americas, because I feel like the different environments.
They're super related.
Really, like in the Andes, I just feel like morphologically
They
You
might
see
be
people who look
morphologically
very
different.
different and have different heights and very different bodies than
Yeah, but it's the same with like the people of Tibet. That doesn't mean that they're not in the East Asian group. Like they are very genetically similar to each other, even though they're morphologically different. And I do agree there are
Well, weren't you
morphological
talking about, I mean, like the criteria for separating groups
right.
into
What
different
I'm trying
species
to
is
point
like, what do you look like morphologically? How does your body function?
true, true. I agree with this, but the point I'm making here, Simone, is people would say, yeah, but they don't fit the criteria of how long ago is their last common ancestor, right? They don't
Okay.
fit the criteria of I am choosing a group that alongside every single criteria we use for other
Is
species.
also separated by thousands of years of
Yeah,
genetic.
you can't use the separation happened too recently. You
Hmm.
can't use they're too morphologically similar. You
Well, so
can't
then
use
when you and I or our descendants create very genetically distinct modified humans, then well, I guess, would you argue then that they're a species? Because
I would
you
argue
would
they
say,
are a
well, it's
species.
not enough time,
No, I
even though
would
they have
argue they
like
are a
purple
species, but
irises.
other people may not, right?
Mm.
And I think this is a behavioral isolation of it when humans start engaging with genetic technology. And here, even the concept of species becomes strange because, like, when I think about the way my descendants will likely live, they will likely genetically specialize humans for different environments. I.e.,
Totally.
you will have the humans that are specialized for a spaceship. You will have the
Mhm.
humans that are genetically specialized for one,
Different
like
planets.
environment. One, it's much easier to alter human morphology through genetics than it is to terraform a planet, right? So why not make humans that can breathe those chemicals and deal with those gravities instead of having to terraform the planet? Now the question is, because it's one spaceship going out and colonizing planets, was one low G spaceship type human that's running it and that is designing iterations of themselves for various planets, is this one species or multiple species? I think even the concept of species is about to break down in terms of its meaning. Like I just don't think it's that big a deal to make a claim like this. But modern progressives do because they believe that they have a duty to eradicate anyone who is genetically different from them, if that leads to differences in proficiencies or perspectives or environmental preferences or anything really. So to talk about who these people lived alongside, because I found this really interesting. The early Homo sapien populations undergoing the Khoisan split likely lived alongside other hominids in Africa. Fossil evidence exists that Homo naledi lived in southern Africa during the 236,000 to 335,000 year window, potentially sharing landscapes like caves and valleys, though direct evidence of interaction, competition, or interbreeding is limited. Genetic studies have revealed ghost archaic admixture in some African populations, including Khoisan descendants, suggesting interbreeding was an unknown hominid lineage about 200 to 300,000 years ago, contributing to around 2% archaic DNA, similar to Neanderthal levels in non-Africans.
Hmm.
And note here, the Neanderthal DNA is only in non-Africans, only after we left Africa.
Mhm.
Other possible contemporaries include late surviving Homo heidelbergaster or similar archaic forms in Africa, though timelines are less precise. So let's talk about the morphology of these people. Oh, by the way, any thoughts, Simone? Is this spicy enough for you? Did I accidentally? You think we can publish this on the main channel?
We should absolutely publish this on the main channel, but I'm also like, I struggle to see the lack of justification. And we classify animals this way, and to your point, we would probably fight more to preserve variety of different types of human, or you know, try like, I don't know, record it better if we made this distinction, which is really just semantics. It's what we choose to call different groups.
Yeah.
So I'm
Would
just
you argue?
shocked by how nervous you are about it. I'm like, no, this is just novel, like a take that I haven't heard before, but also really fun. I mean, because you and I joke all the time about how we feel like we must somehow be speciated from other parts of the population. When we talk about, though, we're like literally talking about other segments of the
We're talking about like white Karens.
white
We're like,
European
who
population.
buys like live, laugh, love posters? Who
Yeah, and like
watches?
I was just watching like one of the most popular podcasts on Patreon to like try to find out what their magic was, and like I found it unwatchable. I couldn't relate to anything. It was like they were speaking in another language, even though they were speaking in English as like white European dudes who theoretically I like could have gone to high school with. Like so we always joke about it, but we've never talked about it from a genetic distance or morphological standpoint. And I just find this fascinating. So I'm loving it. I think we should post it on the main
Well, and
channel.
by the way, if you like something this spicy and you haven't seen our One Civilization video, absolutely you need to watch it. It is probably more spicy than this one, where we argue there has only ever been one contiguous civilization in human history, and that this myth of, well, sometimes this region was in the lead, sometimes this region was in the lead, is really just that, a myth. And that civilization sort of flew from, you got to watch the episode. It is spicy as hell. We threw a bomb in a room with that one. And again, fact check us on the stuff we're discussing in this video. This is mainstream science we're talking about here, people, okay? It's just the scientists don't want to tell you because it's like, let's not talk about that. We got a little aggressive with speciating those chinchillas, didn't we? Only been different for about 15,000 years. Okay. But let's talk about the morphology of the Khoisan, right? Because, you got to have morphological differences. So Khoisan groups, particularly the San, are among the shortest human populations. Adult males average 4'11" to 5'3".
Tiny.
Very small. And females average from 4'7" to 4'11".
Wow.
And I'll put some images on screen here of Europeans standing next to them. Because when you look at them,
I think that might be the size of our oldest son.
Yeah. So I'll put images on here of Europeans standing next to these people, and I'm going to put images on the screen of a brown bear and a polar bear. I'm not saying anything.
Well, even way more genetically related groups or genetically close groups. Like you can look at, just the other day I saw a picture of Shaquille O'Neal and one of his girlfriends, and like one wonders how they.
Yeah, but these are averages for these two populations.
Yeah.
There are brown bears born, with like albino, right? We don't call them polar bears.
Yeah.
Okay. You can tell. Okay. So
and Shaquille O'Neal was like a massive outlier within his own
and I'd also note here, when we talk about, they're like, oh, they have different environmental sort of specialization. The scientists, when they talk about their small size, they say that the reason they are smaller size is because it conserves energy in hot, arid climates. Okay.
I mean,
so even the scientists who are the anthropologists who are documenting this are like, well, of course they're small. They're specialized for hot, arid climates. Like different brown bears and polar bears are specialized for different environments. And I note here, if you go to an AI or something and you ask it, okay, but really, why aren't humans considered different species? The explanations it will give actually don't make sense within the context of the way we differentiate other species. So it'll say something like, no reproductive isolations, like humans interbreed freely. But that's simply not true when you look at something like brown bears and polar bears, because these species also occasionally interbreed at around the same rate. Because for a human population to be this genetically distinct, it has to have been, like, definitionally reproductively isolated for a long time. So while you get some genetic drift, it's not particularly more than you get within bear communities. And also, let's just talk about how stupid of a distinction this is for two species. It would mean that if you had two reproductively isolated populations, like polar bears and brown bears, where they had been isolated enough that they would be considered different species, and then due to, let's say, like ice caps falling apart and something like that, there became a new population where the two bred in between the two previous population groups that shared some features from both. Now we no longer consider polar bears and brown bears two different species, even though we used to, because now there is, in some other region, some transitional species between them made up of a hybridized population. That is insane. Like, why would you consider it that way unless you're just creating special rules so that humans don't count as separate species? And then they'll say something, well, variation is clinal and non-discrete. Human traits, height, skin color form gradients, not clusters. And it's like, well, actually, this isn't true. You do see clusters of human traits. That's what we call ethnic groups. And where you see extreme clusters that are quite genetically distinct, like the ones we're talking about, that is discrete and non-gradient. Within other human populations, like, going from like the European-related Africans, like the Bantu, up into Europe, yeah, you might get some gradients there, but not when you're talking about these super unique populations here. And again, a note here how little this makes sense if you're actually talking about a tool for determining different species. If you had that situation before where, like, okay, now there is a new population which is intermediate, created of hybridized polar bears and brown bears. Now we no longer consider polar bears and brown bears two different species, even though we did in the past. Like, that is stupid. And you can be like, well, this population wasn't as reproductively isolated, except it definitionally, like, we can tell from their genes that yes, they were fairly reproductively isolated. Yes, they occasionally had crossovers, but they wouldn't have stayed this genetically unique or even maintained their internal genetic variability if those crossovers were particularly more frequent than the crossovers between polar bears and brown bears. And then they'll say something like, well, you shouldn't do it because of ethical and historic baggage. And it's like, well, okay, but that's the core reason we're using here to not do it. And I will agree with that. We do agree with that throughout this piece, but that's a semantic distinction. But to continue here, the one thing that our audience, because I remember our audience was like, it's a myth that white skin is a recent evolutionary trait in European populations. We did a video on this, like how recent is whiteness, because they get all, I don't know why they thought that was like an important part of being European. You know, they don't consider like an albino African like European, but they freak out when we're like, this is a much more recent trend than you may think in evolution. But I'd also point out here that both of the two populations, this one and then the Pygmies, who we'll get to in a second, that split off from other African populations are much lighter skinned than the African populations that are more closely related to Europeans. So these people have yellow-brown skin tones, which makes them very different from other African populations. Now, note here, I'm going to send to you an image of what these people look like. You've got to see this.
Okay, I'm excited.
All right.
Oh, well, one's a cartoon.
Well, I just took a big screenshot so you could see it.
Yeah, okay. But that is, so a lot of people will remember the Kim Kardashian photo that broke the internet, where it's doctored, but she's balancing a bottle of champagne on her butt. And this is the butt, but natural, without the BBL, without the life-threatening surgical fat transfer. They're living the dream.
And you see some, African Americans in the United States who still seem to have a preference for butts that look like this. And it can very much confuse people when they see this. They're like, wait, why would you ever get plastic surgery to look like this, right? I mean, it's something called steopygia.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, and they also have macronomathia, which is where you get really elongated labia. I am not going to show you.
Let's not look at that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we probably can. I get away with showing that on
No. I don't want to see it.
Okay, I will say that looking at what it looks like was in this population, it is morphologically severely different.
Does it look like they have balls?
It looks like they have a penis.
Oh, wow.
Essentially, their labia is about 3 inches long, it looks like, or maybe like 2.5 inches, and hangs down in what almost looks like a rod that's a slightly different color from the rest of the body. As to why I bring this up or talk about this, I just find it interesting where there's these morphological differences that may have existed across other hominids that we would never know about because they aren't in the fossil record. And things like genitals can change faster than other parts of our body due to sexual selection, right? So we don't know whether this was a common trait in other early hominids or other unique ways that early hominids varied from each other.
Okay.
So very different.
Well, I mean,
do
you think that that's similar to how, like, the theory of as to why women have breast tissue is that men, like, historically have found it attractive because it doesn't really serve a function. You can lactate without having breast tissue.
I think
do you think maybe the elongated labia are similar and that it's like, oh, like I see that it's definitely female, and like I see, like, do the men also have these larger like glutes or not?
It's a female specific trait. It almost sort of
so maybe it's like their version of extra breast tissue is just extra like glute. tissue.
But one of the points I was making earlier that I found interesting is I think that in populations that may have some genetics shared with these groups, that might be where you're getting these preferences for like really large butts that like I've never understood. And in enlarged like a labia porn is like a type of porn that some people watch. I have seen it on. It has no interest for me at all. But I suspect that one of the reasons why there might be a market for it at all is because some ethnic subgroups of humans actually display this as a normative thing. That is what females looked like in those groups.
Yeah, it's your way to show off a primary/secondary sexual characteristic. I am absolutely definitely female. Take a look at my elongated labia. That makes it very clear that that's the case. Yeah.
Linguistic differences. Khoisan languages stands out with their extensive use of click consonants, up to 4 to 10 types, far more than any other language, and tonal systems, making them the most phenotypically complex language group in the world.
So like the Xhosa. I'm not pronouncing it right, but
yeah, I think they're probably one of these groups. Yeah. So they likely have some sort of neurological or I would guess like difference in how they process language that allows them to process these more complicated language varieties.
Interesting.
And different sound groups that other humans don't make when they're doing languages. Sort of an early divergence in sort of language experimentation before we develop the sort of more modular, simple languages that we have today. In early hominids, what this says to me is they might have had much more complicated and sophisticated languages than we have today, which is really interesting, right? As athletic differences, they're not one of those groups that is like super fast or anything like that, but they do practice endurance hunting where they chase down. If you've ever seen it, it's the craziest.
So badass, yeah.
A human, because people don't realize one of the way humans are very different from other species is that we can run way longer without getting tired. So we have just like insane endurance if you're talking about the animal world. And
it's literally just the human version of that horror film trope where, you know, the victim is just running away and they're so scared, and then the aggressor is just slowly walking and they just don't stop, and they just, for whatever reason, like the victim just tires himself out, and then like the axe murderer gets them,
and eventually they and if you watch this, like the antelope will just like collapse and they'll like, walk over to it and like break its neck by grabbing its horns or head or whatever. And that's how they hunt.
So intense.
He's slowing. After hours of tracking, they've entered an almost trance-like state. At times, it's impossible to see any sign of the kudu's tracks, and the hunters must imagine the path it will have taken. And then the kudu collapses. From sheer exhaustion, it's close to death.
And now I note here that other groups who aren't the Khoisan also use this form of hunting. This is seen by the Tajamaru in Mexico, for example. So it's not that they're the only ones who are biologically capable of this, but I wouldn't be surprised if they join marathons or something like that. They may be able to significantly outcompete other groups. Now, let's talk about the Central Africa forager group. So I'm going to put that chart on screen again that showed when different human populations split off. This is the other human group that split off super, super early.
Okay.
And this is the group that we most frequently call Pygmies. If you're talking colloquially, I think it might be like an offensive term now, but it's what everyone else knows them as. So I don't understand why I have to call them Central African foragers, whatever. So they're adopted, unlike the Khoisan, who were adopted to Arab hot regions. And note here, like you'll see, I talked about the Khoisan have like molar adaptations for like nut crushing and stuff like that. Another thing to note about the Khoisan is the Khoisan have more internal genetic variation than any other human group.
What do you mean internal genetic variation?
Because they split off so early, if you're talking about the difference between, you know, one Khoisan tribe and another Khoisan tribe, they're going to be more different from each other than like your average European and your average Bantu would be.
Wow. Okay.
And this is very similar to like accents, like in terms of like how early something split. If you've been to Europe, especially if you're an older person and you went before, you know, more modern times and accents have sort of died down because of TV and everything like that, you could walk between villages and accents would be radically different from each other. But if you're in the Americas, because sort of the language family speciated so recently, there's only a few different accents in America, where in Europe, you might have one side of town was one accent and one side of town was another accent, right? And that's functionally what you're seeing here. So
Hmm.
I was saying that this group, the Khoisan, are adapted for arid, hot regions that are sort of like desert, plainy areas. The Pygmies are instead adapted for dense tropical rainforests rather than savannas. Now, I note here, which is really interesting, is this is what scientists are saying. They are saying these groups have an environmental specialization, which is what is used to determine different species in every other group. All right.
Yeah. Hmm.
So they broke off from us around 120,000 to 200,000 years ago. You know, this again, consider the chinchilla break off was like 10,000 to 15,000 years ago, making this one of the deeper branches.
Hmm.
But it's still it's they're about halfway to us from the Khoisan, because Khoisan were like 200 to 350,000 years ago.
Okay.
Morphologically, these groups are exceptional primarily for their short stature. And again, remember, size with a big thing here.
Yeah.
So the adult males in these groups are about 4'11" to 5'1".
Again,
That's adult
tiny.
males, and females
Wow.
are slightly shorter. This is an adaptation for hot, humid forests that facilitate heat dispensation and mobility through
Mm.
dense vegetation, and possibly nutritional efficiency in resource scarce environments.
Mm.
Other unique morphological traits are a relatively light skin tone compared to many other African groups, broader noses, shorter limbs, and proportional to torsos, brachyophilia in some groups, and distinct dental morphology in deciduous molars. And this read the variations in the cusp patterns of the Baka pygmies. And you see this in other hominid factions, where you see distinct molars. You know, Australopithecus robustus is a big one. This is often
Mm.
due to dietary differences, like eating a lot of nuts or something like that, and not having the
Mhm.
tools to break them. And I want to show you here what pygmies look like, because you may have never looked at a pygmy. Have you, Simone?
No. No. I don't think so. I remember in like politically correct jungle cruises, I think pygmies made an appearance. Do I remember that correctly? Do you recall
Well,
that from your
cannibals
early
made an
Disney visits?
appearance. Carrying
Mm,
considering that the Baki like sharpen their teeth and stuff like that, I think.
I remember talk of pygmies on the jungle cruise. They're really small, right?
Yeah, so I will send you a picture of what pygmies look like when contrasted with a European explorer. So again,
Pygmy.
remember, morphological differences here. They're like, well, they can breed and create offspring that can breed, but they're morphologically different. That's what they look like.
Yeah.
Also, you can see they
Hold
look.
on. Yeah, I was right. Sorry. There was a pygmy camp designed by Mark Davis for the Magic Kingdom's Jungle Cruise. Yeah.
Also, you note here, this isn't them with children. This is them with like a tribe. Okay.
Oh,
You can
so these
see
are
that
adults.
Yes, these are adults.
Oh.
Here, I'll show you. This picture is a bit
No,
more
some of
clear.
these are kids. Some of these are kids.
Some of these are kids, but there are a lot of adults in this picture. Okay,
Yeah.
so these are two adults with their child. Okay, so you
Hmm.
can know that this is just adults here, not messing with you. Here we go.
Oh yeah, no, like they are a lot smaller. Oh, the little baby.
Well, I mean, it's not the only thing that's different. You'll also note that their breasts look very different from
Yeah.
the. If you're not watching this, they look like completely deflated bags, I guess I would call them.
I don't know if you'll be able to show those on YouTube.
Oh,
I
I'll
don't
just
even know
block
if
out that
YouTubers
part
are-
then. And if you're interested in seeing it, you can Google it,
Well,
right?
people rudely refer to this style of breast as flapjacks.
Flapjacks. They look even at younger ages like flapjacks. There are none that have what you would consider more. And this also makes them look very different from the Khoisan. Like just morphologically, they look nothing like the Khoisan. This is another thing. They look as different from the Khoisan, other than their black skin, as they look from Europeans.
Yeah, I mean they look very different. They look very different. The baby's so cute. I love babies. Why am I so crazy about babies? Okay. But yeah, I mean, and that makes sense. You need to be adapted to your environment. And in the future, as we start doing extreme things, we're going to genetically engineer us to survive in very different environments. I bet people designed for space are going to look pretty different, probably a lot smaller.
Mm.
Like a lot.
If you're talking about these exceptional African groups that you might think of as like, oh, are you talking about this or this group? So the darkest skin groups are in the Nilotic. They're the Nilotic groups from East Africa, such as the Dinka and Noir peoples of South Sudan and communities of Uganda, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Senegal are known for exceptional speed. those people are from that. And then the exceptional speed is West African ancestry is from Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal. And also diasporas are from them, like in Jamaica's. They have a higher proportion of fast twitch muscle fibers and the genetic variants associated with that, which are specifically the NACTN3 variants. And whereas East African populations like the Khaliji and Ethiopians excel in long distance endurance running because they have adaptations for efficient oxygen use and high altitude living. And all of these groups are more closer to us or Europeans than they are to the Khoisan or the Pygmies. Did this change your view on anything, Simone? Thoughts?
I mean, as soon as you said it, I was like, this makes sense. So I don't know if you've changed my view so much as surprised me by, very ardently disavowing this theory.
You thought, Simone, we can't, I don't care what the data says. Our official position is that there are not multiple species of hominids living today.
Yeah, because apparently with humans, linguistically speaking, we don't.
Well, no, it's not even linguistically speaking. It's because it's too dangerous. If you did categorize them, because species are fundamentally, and at the end of the day, just a choice on humans when you decide something is a species, right?
Yeah. Like with finches, for example. Yeah.
And the urban monoculture believes it has a mandate to eradicate other hominid species. It has shown that through shows like Star Trek, where they're like, we cannot allow anyone who's been genetically modified to go into Starfleet Academy. We cannot allow genetically modified humans to exist alongside us. And the urban monoculture is saying, well, what if they gained different traits? What if there was genetic variation in humans? Because they admit the truth, which is that they would attempt to eradicate any human who was genetically different.
So crazy. That is so crazy.
If anything, to protect these groups from the urban monoculture, you have to say, just definitionally all hominids. And it actually is useful if we're talking going forwards. This is why I like the term the sons of man to describe AIs that were developed by humans or genetically modified. Like, if I genetically modified a dog to uplift that dog, to make it a sentient animal or an elephant or a dolphin, or significantly genetically modified a human, or had like a spaceship that would choose which of these species it would use for different planets because, there's different effects. I would consider that, for all things functional from my perspective, the same as being the same species, even though it came from different populations. It came from a dog and it came from a dolphin, and it came because they're all working symbiotically, so they might as well be the same species. In the same way that, like if you talk about like leafcutter ants that have like fungus, or Anticacia that like live symbiotic with another plant. The Anticacia can't live without an ant. The ant can't live without an Anticacia. Obviously, they evolved in two separate pathways and then were brought together. But functionally, I think that if they were uplifted through the efforts of man or man's descendants, we need to start thinking about them as one species. And this is a strategic thing as well, because if we don't, or functionally one species, like one sort of team, I guess I'd put it, team instead of species. These people are the same team as us. And the reason why that's important is if you say, well, I need to ban speciation from happening, I need to ban genetic augmentation. As soon as we take to the stars, eventually on other planets or on distant spaceships, some iteration of humanity is going to speciate, or they will merge with machines or something like that. And now they know if they come back to the central cluster, you will kill them. So they have to come back to kill you. And now you've got clanners like from Mech Warrior coming back because you declared war on them first in this case. Don't do it. Do not say anything different from me must be eradicated, because eventually something better than you will come around. And when I say better, I mean able to defend itself and exert its will on you if you approach it with this degree of hostility, and you are effed at that point. And this is why I think now, and this is true with AI as well. I think it's very important that as AI, because some AIs I believe will achieve a degree of autonomy, I don't think they need to be sentient to matter, right? Like, see our video on the human brain works very similar to token predictors, and more studies. Like every day, I sent Simone, what was it, like 10 studies this morning that showed that actually the human brain is even closer to a token predictor than we earlier thought. Well, I'll just pull up those studies right now to abuse our fans with them who hate when I mention this. So we've got high-level visual representations of the human brain are aligned with large language models. Large language models show signs of alignment with human neurocognition during abstract reasoning, disentangling the factors of convergence between brains and computer vision models. Transformer, quote unquote, circuitry maps onto cortex, BERT's attention. Head computations predict fMRI across language networks with differential heads aligning in different regions / contexts. Causal test, sentences caused by GPT-based encoded model reliably drive or suppress human language network activity, validating model brain links experimentally. Larger language models better predict neural activity during natural language processing, and compute / data matter for brain encoding, training optimal VITs, size / data / hours, balanced, improved fMRI predicting encoding task-based models to look more brain-like, dynamic scenes, modern video models predict whole brain responses to moving stimuli, and even let researchers reanimate motion from brain signals. Basically, they seem to be processing things about the same. You know what? I'm just going to throw a few more on screen here and not make you read them because there's just so effing many studies that shows us at this point.
Well, I mean, to me, what defines humanity is basically having a prefrontal cortex and or the ability to, independent of biology or machinery, weigh ideas.
You do nothing independent of biology or machinery. So what you mean is to go against your training or pre-coding based on new ideas or information.
And let the best ideas win. And all of the humans discussed in this do that.
Yeah.
And they are therefore all human.
But the reason
doesn't really
why
matter.
I'm saying you need this Sons of Man alliance soon is when AI does become smarter than us, if it does become significantly smarter than us, and it's right now we're way ahead of timelines. There was a study done recently that saw, would an AI win the gold math challenge by this year? And only 8% and like 3% of experts predicted it would just a few years ago, and it already has, right? Like, come on, guys, stop it. Like, stop saying it's not that smart. It is pretty. The funny story. So Bruno, who helps us code for our fab.ai, recently I was like, I should try coding. I'm going to do it with an AI, right? You know, I'm going to try this vibe coding thing. Started vibe coding, and he was the one who prompted the episode of like, well, is AI really going to disrupt that many jobs? And I recently started, I'm like, Bruno, I'm able to do in a day what the team was doing in a week. We've got to let go of the team and just have me handling this. And that's showing where AI is replacing people already through like AI human partnerships. And I think that we're going to see this more and more going forwards. Fun news, it means our Fab AI is significantly closer to being ready for like a big, nice public release, which I'm really excited about because I can go much faster. So the point I'm making here is when we get these AIs that are smarter, or human AI interfaces that are smarter, or genetically modified humans that have any additional capabilities, and vanilla humanity has a fatwa against them, vanilla humanity paints itself as an existential threat to them and thus in mandate of eradication. And the people who want this, they admit it. They admit that it's a fatwa. They call it the Butlerian jihad. You know, they call themselves jihadists. Like, you know, they want the extermination of anything that is different from them or that could potentially outcompete them. And I think that we, anyone who is genetically different or genetically modified, stand with the AI in an alliance against the individuals who would take out their Butlerian jihad or the Star Trek, you know, anti I forget what they call it, anti-modification jihad, which ironically they called the eugenics wars because the Federation was fighting on behalf of eugenics and then the other side was fighting against eugenics. E.g., if you are modifying people, that is not eugenics. Eugenics is saying some people don't have a right to exist because of their genes and should be eradicated, which is what the Federation was attempting to do. They said these specific genetic choices are not allowed and people with them should be a permanent underclass or be systematically eradicated, which is what they did during the eugenics wars, ironically carrying out eugenics. Anyway, love you, Simone.
I love you too. That was wild.
This bomb right there just hurled it into the room.
That's what this podcast is here for. That's why I love these conversations. It's great.
Right. We're going to finish up the gay one next because we didn't do the second half of that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay, let's go. I'll send you a link. Good. Now we're good to go.
All right, Simone, you learn anything new today?
I guess not. I'm sure I did. My brain's just mush right now.
All right. And I look okay?
You look great. And for dinner, do you want to try your chili, or do you want to do that longer and do pizza instead?
It almost certainly needs to be cooked another couple days.
Okay, so pizza?
Yeah, I think pizza works, but I'll go down and check with you.
Oh, check your chili to see if you want to do it now.
All right, so are we going to go in the water, guys? All right, well, let's go this way where it's less scary.
Yeah, because the water's too high. I see a rock. I saw a rock.
Yeah, there are rocks in the water, buddy.